Hello and welcome back. We've covered many episodes and 2 movies of Tales from the Crypt, so naturally, today we're talking about Bordello of Blood. The funny thing is, this wasn't even the movie they were planning to make. The crew was all set to film a dark psychological thriller called Dead Easy, also known as Fat Tuesday, set in New Orleans during Mardi Gras. It would have been more grounded and creepy, not the campy vampire comedy we ended up with. But right before shooting, Universal Pictures scrapped Dead Easy and ordered the team to instead make a movie from an old Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale script about vampire prostitutes. This change happened so late in the game that they had to shift gears instantly, rewriting and prepping on the fly. This seems to be a trend with the Tales from the Crypt movies, scrapping the original idea and making a script or story that has been floating around Hollywood for years. It worked with Demon Knight, so Universal tried the same trick twice. Filming took place in Vancouver, Canada, mostly for budget reasons and to get around union issues. But summer in Vancouver meant incredibly short nights, making it almost impossible to film the many nighttime scenes without rushing like crazy. Director Gilbert Adler has joked about shouting, "The sun's coming up," to get everyone moving faster. On top of that, the set was plagued by giant flies which swarmed around the hot lights and made outdoor shooting miserable. This was meant to be the second in a trilogy of movies, but as you'll see later, Bordello of Blood's reception completely derailed those plans. In fact, it's often cited as the beginning of the end for the long-running popular series. Honestly, if you go in with low expectations, you'll be entertained. As I've said before, I didn't want to watch this movie because it stars Dennis Miller, which means he's basically playing himself and will spend the majority of his screen time trying to land one sarcastic joke after another. And I wish I was over-exaggerating about it. But sure, you expect jokes in a horror comedy, but how many? 10, maybe 20 or 30? Well, as a little side project, I kept a clicker on hand while watching and pressed it every time Dennis Miller tried to land a joke. Want to guess the number? Dennis Miller tries and mostly fails to land 77 jokes. He only says about 5 or 6 lines in the whole film that don't have a sarcastic jab tucked in somewhere. But don't let the impending wave of would-be one-liners scare you off. And if you want to buy or rent this movie for yourself, I'll have affiliate links in the video description down below. I promise I'll actually put them there this time. But as always, we'll recap the story and pause at certain points to share some behind-the-scenes info. With all that out of the way, let's talk about Bordello of Blood. Our story begins in the vast forests of Tierra del Fuego. A group of explorers, led by a man named Vincent, are searching for a hidden treasure. They locate the site and begin digging. Before long, they uncover the entrance to a cavern. Inside, they find a tomb, and within it lies Lilith. Vincent, the lead explorer, declares that she is the most terrible woman in the world. He spent the last 10 years searching for her, so he can give her back her heart. He opens a box containing the heart, which slowly reassembles itself before he shoves it into the corpse chest. The heart begins to take, but suddenly stops. Frustrated, Vincent starts slamming the heel of his palm into the chest, desperate to get it beating again. When his efforts fail, he orders the men to wrap her up so he can try again later. But the men turn on him, slamming the lid of the coffin shut, only to see fresh blood spill from the seams. Terrified, they ask who she is. Vincent reveals the truth. She's not just a vampire, she's the mother of all vampires. Lilith then begins to kill and feed on the guides one by one, slowly rejuvenating herself with each gruesome kill. He then pulls out the blood key, the same key God entrusted to a long line of successors, last known to be in the possession of Geraldine after the events of Demon Knight. Vincent tells them that whoever holds the key controls Lilith. He then turns to the newly reformed vampire and asks, if you give her one more body to feed on, will she behave? Lilith grins and happily agrees, before devouring the last remaining guide. But then it's revealed that this is all just a story, being told by a mummy. Played by Tales from the Crypt veteran William Sadler, he sits at a table with our old pal, the Crypt Keeper. Their conversation is boring the Keeper. Luckily, things are about to pick up. The mummy says the crypt isn't big enough for the both of them, and proposes a game of rock, paper, scissors. But this isn't just any game. If you lose a round, you lose a body part. a gruesome callback to the classic Tales from the Crypt episode titled Cutting Cards. The Crypt Keeper loses the first round, and then his hand. Before the next round begins, the Keeper cuts away, bringing us to the story of Bordello of Blood. We open on a house where a young woman named Catherine is working out on a stationary bike. Let's take a moment to talk about one of the more unusual casting choices, Erika Eleniak as Catherine. By the mid-90s, Eleniak was best known for Baywatch and Under Siege, and casting her in a horror comedy about vampire prostitutes was, let's say, an unexpected career turn. She said in interviews that she took the role partly because she wanted to break away from her swimsuit image and do something edgier, even if the script was a bit wild. Behind the scenes, Eleniak was reportedly one of the few cast members who didn't cause production headaches. While Miller and Feldman were going off script and clashing with the crew, she kept things professional, but also found herself caught in the middle of the chaos. Director Gilbert Adler has said she sometimes had to react to lines from Miller that she'd never heard before because he'd made them up on the spot, which could throw off her timing. It's also worth noting that her character was originally written to be more cynical and sarcastic, but the studio wanted her to be a more wholesome counterbalance to Rafe's sleaziness, so her dialogue was toned down in rewrites. This makes her performance feel more straight-laced compared to the chaos around her, which actually works in the movie's favor. She becomes the grounded character in a story full of over-the-top personalities. Eleniak said that the most frustrating part about filming the movie was when her co-stars would show up late or simply wouldn't show up at all. She then had to run her side of the lines with a stand-in or stunt double to get the filming done on time. Overall, Erika Eleniak should be praised for her role in the film, purely for her professionalism alone. Upstairs, her brother Caleb, played by Corey Feldman, is blasting his music a little too loud for her liking. She tries to turn it down, but being the punk that he is, he just cranks it up even louder. The two argue, and Caleb storms off to a bar to hang out with his buddies. There they play a dumbed-down version of darts. In true punk fashion, Caleb lands a dart squarely in his friend's crotch. With friends like these, who the hell needs enemies? They toast to getting laid that night. Then, a stranger approaches the group and tells them about a bordello, one where even guys like them can get lucky. Since they can't seem to pick up women the traditional way, two of them take the bait and head off to the address the stranger gave them. Caleb and his friend pull up to an old-style funeral home in their Wayne's World car. They see a large group of cars parked out front. The two exit the car and knock on the door. An older man named McCutcheon, played by Aubrey Morris, answers. The two friends, sensing that things are a little too sketchy for their liking, start to leave, until McCutcheon slyly asks if they're here to meet the women down in the hidden bordello. The friends pause, turn around, and decide to enter the funeral home. McCutcheon leads them to a coffin and tells them to get in. The two momentarily come to their senses and try to back out, but McCutcheon suddenly pulls out an old German-style pistol and forces them into the coffin. He slams the lid shut and yanks a green rope, seemingly dropping the coffin into a blazing furnace, ready to incinerate them. McCutcheon giggles to himself as the two pound on the lid in a panic, but instead of burning, the coffin travels down an intricate rail system, an elaborate hidden entrance to the secret bordello. When the coffin opens, the guys are greeted by a pair of fun bags right in their faces. Of course, I can't show that due to being on YouTube, so instead, here's a shot of the woman's smiling face. Once again, there's a bunch of nakedness I can't show here, but there's enough boobies in this scene to call it a titty committee. Caleb's friend is whisked away upstairs by a beautiful woman, while another woman named Patrice picks Caleb. We cut to the friend getting busy upstairs. As they kiss, he moves the woman's hair aside and sees two puncture marks on her neck. Before things escalate, Lilith walks into the room, now appearing as a stunning, normal-looking woman. She declares it's her job to finish him off. The two begin kissing, and she sticks her tongue down his throat, though not in the fun way. Her tongue goes so deep it pushes the man's heart out through his chest. Lilith then feasts on the removed heart. Meanwhile, Caleb is seemingly enjoying his night with Patrice, but before things get too heated, Lilith appears again. Just before we see Caleb's fate, the screen fades to black. We then cut to Catherine, trying to file a missing persons report for her brother, who's now been gone for days. The cop brushes her off, saying he's swamped with missing persons cases and won't be able to look into her brother for a while. A man sitting nearby cracks jokes at the cop's expense. Here's where things get interesting. The role of Rafe Gutman wasn't originally written with Dennis Miller in mind. In fact, producers considered actors like Daniel Baldwin or Bill Paxton for the part, which would have given the movie a completely different vibe. But producer Joel Silver overruled everyone and insisted on Dennis Miller, despite objections from director Gilbert Adler. Miller's casting fee was a cool $1 million, money that was literally shaved out of the special effects budget, which forced the crew to scale back some of the practical gore and creature work. Once production began, Miller's reputation for being a major pain in the ass gave the entire cast and crew a giant headache. He improvised most of his lines, often ignoring the script entirely. While that gave his performance a sarcastic edge, it also made continuity and scene matching a nightmare. Crew members recalled that Miller sometimes wouldn't show up on time, or at all, for certain shots, forcing them to use the script supervisors as stand-in just to complete the scenes. Corey Feldman, who plays Catherine's rebellious brother, has claimed that Miller once borrowed a production van without permission to leave the set early. While it's never been officially confirmed, stories like that paint a picture of a chaotic, tense set. The mood among cast and crew was far from the fun, horror comedy vibe they were trying to capture on screen. Due to Miller's antics, this was and is his one and only time being a leading man. Once word got out how obnoxious and difficult Miller was to work with, no studio wanted to book him as a lead. Miller still acted in movies, sure, but he didn't get another true lead role where he was the central protagonist driving the whole story. Instead, he mostly took on supporting roles and cameos playing himself. But let's face it, every role that Miller takes on is just him playing himself. As Catherine prepares to leave, the man steps in her path and introduces himself as Rafe, a private investigator who says he might be able to help. Catherine brushes him off, but Rafe follows and tries the hard sell. She eventually relents, and the two sit down to talk over what happened. She agrees to hire him. Rafe gets a phone call that pulls his attention. It's implied he's talking to his ex-wife. As he rants in the background, Catherine quietly looks around his office. The two head to the bar to question people about Caleb. One of Caleb's friends gives Rafe the address the stranger had passed along, the one for the mysterious whorehouse. The other friend, irritated by Rafe's rapid-fire wisecracks, grows increasingly annoyed. Rafe leaves the bar before he ends up with fewer teeth over his bargain bin selection of would-be witty comebacks and one-liners. He heads to the funeral home and stumbles into a funeral service in progress. He grabs an open seat, unknowingly sitting right next to the same mysterious man who originally gave Caleb the address. We then cut to Catherine at work watching a broadcast of Reverend J.G. Current, played by Chris Sarandon, who we recently covered in our review of the original Child's Play. Rafe walks into the church just as the Reverend begins delivering an over-the-top sermon, complete with an electric guitar performance, and we see Vincent again. Not only has he survived his dealings with Lilith, he's clearly been thriving since. Rafe informs Catherine that her brother went to a local whorehouse. Upset by her brother's behavior, she thanks Rafe for his time and offers to pay him. But Rafe insists the job's not over. Caleb is still technically missing. Catherine, a woman of God, is deeply disappointed. She says that if that's truly where her brother ended up, she doesn't want to know anymore. Later at the bar, Rafe drinks and complains to the bartender about Catherine, and women in general. The strange man from earlier once again tries to sell the idea of the Bordello, repeating the address of the funeral home. Rafe asks if he saw him at the funeral earlier. The strange man pays him no mind, not even turning his head from his helping of raw meat. Rafe returns to the funeral home but is turned away by McCutcheon. Determined, Rafe sneaks into the funeral home, only to nearly get caught by Lilith, who seems to be sniffing something out. But it turns out, she was just smelling her own BO. Rafe makes his way into the back rooms of the funeral home. On a medical tray next to a cadaver, Rafe finds Caleb's nose stud, confirming that Caleb had been there. We then cut back to Catherine at work, speaking with the Reverend. He's almost turned away, until he hands Catherine her brother's nose stud. Fearing the worst, she asks Rafe to continue the investigation. Rafe agrees and says he's going to stake out the hidden Bordello that very night. But instead of staking it out, he goes right back to knocking on the door, just in time for the strange man to arrive. McCutcheon lets them in, and Rafe hops into the coffin, riding it down into the hidden bordello. The coffin lid opens to reveal naked women running around at what seems to be a non-stop house party. Of course, Dennis Miller cracks an off-color joke, one that lands with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Rafe is led upstairs by a beautiful woman. Meanwhile, McCutcheon reports to Lilith that they've got a problem. The strange man is having trouble with his vampire transformation. Lilith tries to talk to him, but when he shows weakness, she swiftly and effortlessly removes his head. Rafe tricks and locks up the woman in a torture rack, so he can do some snooping around the bordello. He exits so fast he accidentally drops his wallet. Rafe rides the coffin lift back up and attempts to exit out the front door, but nearly gets caught by McCutcheon. He hides in the parlor inside one of the coffins. Once McCutcheon leaves, Rafe steps out, only to realize he was sharing the coffin with the now-dead strange man. Elsewhere, Lilith finds Rafe's wallet and tastes a smear of blood left behind on one of her vampire's fingers. She remarks that his blood is a rare type, one she hasn't tasted since Ivan the Terrible. She says they not only need to catch Rafe, but they need to keep him alive. Back at his apartment, Rafe is loading a gun and getting loaded himself, when Lilith suddenly appears behind him, holding out his wallet. She tries to seduce him, tuning into his fantasies. But just before she can lure him in, Catherine returns. Lilith leaves quietly. Rafe and Catherine then head to the police to report what they've found. Rafe convinces the cops to come with him to the funeral home. When he tries to demonstrate the secret entrance using the coffin, instead of riding the rail system, the coffin drops into the kettle and burns up. McCutcheon appears to have covered his tracks. The cop, already biased against Rafe, is quick to dismiss him. Catherine and the officer accuse Rafe of lying, saying he's just trying to scam money out of her. Lilith and Vincent watch from a second-story window as the cop and Catherine leave, and Rafe is left looking like a fool. Lilith turns to Vincent and, like a devil whispering in his ear, suggests they could be making a lot of money if he gives her the key, abandoning the Reverend and working solely with her. Let's talk about Angie Everhart, the actress behind Lilith, our seductive vampire queen. Casting her wasn't exactly the result of a long, competitive audition process. It was more like Hollywood phone tag. Director Gilbert Adler has openly admitted he didn't know who she was when producers suggested her, but she was dating Sylvester Stallone at the time, and her name was making headlines in the entertainment world. Joel Silver and the higher-ups thought that casting a glamorous supermodel would help market the film, especially to a male audience, so Everhart got the gig without much screen test fuss. Now, while she might have been green as an actress, she dove headfirst into the role. What she didn't know was just how grueling the transformation into Lilith would be. The prosthetic makeup process for later scenes was a beast. Some days it took up to 13 hours to get her into full vampire form. Everhart later joked that the only part of her face that wasn't covered in prosthetics was this tiny little patch between her nose and upper lip. Imagine sitting in a chair all day while people glue, paint, and attach fangs to you, only to then be asked to perform high-energy, over-the-top villain scenes. She might not have been a seasoned actress, but her willingness to go big while suffering under layers of makeup and contacts gave Lilith the larger-than-life presence the film desperately needed. It's kind of ironic, in a production where the lead actor and supporting star were causing headaches, it was the model-turned-actress, arguably the risky casting choice, who brought the most commitment and consistency to the table. And in hindsight, her Lilith is one of the few parts of Bordello of Blood that still gets love from horror fans today. Vincent later returns to the megachurch and hands the blood key over to the Reverend, subtly questioning his own payment in the arrangement. The Reverend shoots daggers at Vincent just for asking. Later, the Reverend rehearses a dramatic stage performance, one where he'll shred on an electric guitar as a hidden laser blasts a fake devil rising from below the stage. During rehearsal, the laser misfires, burning a cross into the floor. The stagehands tell the Reverend to wait in his office while they reset the effects. Meanwhile, Catherine tells him she wants to make a documentary. The Reverend agrees. Meanwhile, Rafe tails a hearse from the funeral home, suspicious about how heavy the coffin looks as the pallbearers struggle to carry it. He returns to the mausoleum later that night to investigate. We cut back to the Reverend returning to his office, just as Vincent steps into the elevator. Vincent looks rushed. The Reverend, suspecting something foul is happening, runs to his office, only to find his safe open and the blood key missing. Vincent and Lilith convince the Reverend to meet them at a strip club. Catherine storms into the club with a cameraman. Vincent and the Reverend flee, and Lilith confronts Catherine. We cut back to Rafe, who's in the tomb and finds the coffin from McCutcheon's funeral home filled with bodies left over from Lilith's feeding sessions. Then, back in a back alley, the Reverend tries to convince Vincent to hand over the key. Lilith intervenes, and Vincent is forced to choose a side. He chooses Lilith, tossing the key into the air where it smashes to the ground, erupting in a burst of flames. Vincent asks Lilith to kill the Reverend. She denies him, saying she wants the Reverend to witness what's going to happen now that she's free. Rafe gets the photos developed and takes them to Catherine. She opens the envelope to find there's only one person visible in the coffin. Thinking it's a sick joke, she has security kick Rafe out. Catherine later reviews the footage she recorded at the strip club and notices that Lilith doesn't appear on camera. Now she realizes Rafe wasn't joking, and that there likely was another body in the coffin that didn't show up on film. Catherine finds Rafe, and the two of them talk things over. They both come to the conclusion that they are dealing with vampires. Suddenly, the phone rings. It's Caleb, panicked and asking for help. He says they're after him and he's hiding at an old power plant. Rafe and Catherine rush over. Inside, the place is dark and seemingly empty. After wandering through what looks like the set of the 1989 Batman movie, they find Caleb lying on the ground, seemingly unconscious. When Rafe turns him over, Caleb springs to his feet and does a bad Beetlejuice impersonation. Rafe shoots him for it. The bullets have no effect. Rafe and Catherine run, with Caleb in pursuit. Catherine uses a chain to swing to an exit. Rafe tries to do the same, but overshoots and crashes through a window, landing on a cop car. Just like not knowing when to shut up and stop joking, he also don't seem to know when to let go of a fucking chain. Catherine is caught by Vincent and McCutcheon, while Rafe is taken by the cops. This is the all is lost moment leading us into the final act. Rafe wakes up like a Diddy victim, face down, ass up, and no idea where he is or what happened. The cop from earlier questions him. Rafe tries to explain, but the cop isn't buying it. A nurse enters and asks for the cop's help with something. Rafe breaks free, only to discover that the naughty nurse has killed the cop. She's no nurse, she's a vampire. Rafe and the vampire nurse fight. In the process, the nurse's uniform gets ripped on a coat hook, exposing her back to sunlight. She explodes like a balloon in a microwave. The pop is so loud it wakes Whoopi Goldberg from her nap.
You want to try to keep it down here, please? I'm trying to rest. I knew I should have taken that private room.
We cut back to Catherine and Caleb talking. Caleb continues with his bad Beetlejuice act while Catherine tries, and fails, to get him to release her. Lilith enters and says she wants to take Catherine for a test ride. No surprise, creepy Caleb wants to watch. The Reverend arrives at the funeral home, pretending that if you can't beat them, join them. But Vincent sees through the act. The Reverend is only a distraction. Rafe crashes through the front door with the car, flattening McCutcheon in the process. Rafe steps out of the car and immediately gives Vincent a new hole to breathe from. The Reverend and Rafe team up. Rafe tosses the Reverend a squirt gun. The Reverend looks at him like he's lost his mind, but Rafe explains that the guns are filled with holy water. The duo turns the Bordello into an impromptu wet t-shirt contest, except instead of slippery nipples, this part is filled with blood, guts, gore, and flames. Vampiric hookers pop like water balloons filled with pus. Rafe finds and kills Caleb with a quick shot from the Holy Super Soaker, finally putting an end to the discount Beetlejuice. Corey Feldman brought his own brand of chaos to Bordello of Blood, and it wasn't exactly the kind you want on a film set. By this point in the 1990s, Feldman had a bit of a reputation for being unpredictable, and according to multiple crew accounts, he often showed up to set high. He later admitted in interviews that he was dealing with personal struggles at the time, and it definitely bled into his work on the movie. Some crew members have said that scenes sometimes had to be delayed or adjusted because Feldman wasn't fully prepared or was visibly under the influence. His antics didn't stop there. Feldman was known to go off script, sometimes to humorous effect, but other times in ways that threw off other actors. Between takes, he was reportedly more interested in goofing around than staying locked into character. There were even rumors, never officially confirmed, that he and Dennis Miller occasionally clashed, since both had a tendency to do their own thing rather than stick tightly to the planned shots. Despite the distractions, Feldman still managed to deliver a memorable performance as Catherine's rebellious brother, Caleb. In a strange way, his wild energy actually suited the character, who was meant to be a troublemaker and skeptic. It's one of those weird occasions where real life blended into the role, giving an authentic edge, even if it drove the crew completely mad behind the scenes. While Rafe deals with Caleb, the Reverend finds Catherine locked in a back room. He tries to free her, only to find out it was a ruse. Lilith was pretending to be Catherine. She switches back to her true form and stabs the Reverend with his own knife. Just then, Rafe jumps into frame and buries an axe into Lilith's shoulder. She suddenly vanishes. Rafe finds the real Catherine and frees her. The two share final words with the dying Reverend, who tells them to get to the studio and broadcast to the world to warn people. They rush back to the studio. Catherine takes the stage, and Rafe mans the camera. But as Jonas in the booth hits the button to start the live broadcast in 30 seconds, things go haywire. The stage begins to split open and the fake devil appears. Fake smoke fills the stage, and Jonas is killed off camera. Lilith appears behind Rafe and cuffs him to the railing. Rafe yells to warn Catherine that Lilith is coming. Lilith attacks her as Rafe sees the laser system and turns it on, aiming it with his foot. Just as Lilith is about to kill Catherine, Rafe hits the fire button, burning across through her body and splitting her heart into 4 pieces. But as long as her heart remains inside her body, she'll continue to live. Just as Lilith is about to kill Rafe, Catherine comes in clutch and stabs a pole through Lilith's back, popping her heart out. 1 piece lands in Rafe's hands. Later at the funeral home, Lilith's heart is cut into 4 pieces and placed into a wooden box. Meanwhile, her remains are incinerated, marking the end for the Vampire Queen. Rafe and Catherine joke and flirt as they walk out to Catherine's car. They sit inside, talk for a bit, and start kissing. Rafe kisses her neck, remarking on how nice her perfume smells. Catherine replies, "It's not perfume, it's sunscreen," before revealing 2 puncture marks on her upper thigh. Rafe gets some final necking in, but not the kind he was hoping for. The camera pans out as it's implied that Catherine, now turned into a vampire, kills and feeds on Rafe, finally putting an end to all the bad jokes and try-hard witty comebacks. So overall I say, it's a happy ending. When Bordello of Blood hit theaters in 1996, the expectations were high. Demon Knight, the first Tales from the Crypt film, had made over $21 million and attracted a respectable fan following. But Bordello only managed to generate approximately $5.6 million, less than a third of that, and the film was widely criticized by movie reviewers. Many blamed the weak script, the tone that didn't quite land, and the behind-the-scenes turmoil. The disappointing box office performance put an end to Universal's plans for the 3rd film in the trilogy. Over time, though, the movie gained a bit of a cult following, finding an appreciative audience despite its troubled production and initial critical reception. Horror fans began to appreciate its campy humor, the practical gore effects, and its status as a so-bad-it's-good cult classic. Some diehards even argue that Miller's snarky improvements gave the movie a unique flavor, even if it came at the cost of a smoother production schedule. Years later, Gilbert Adler and A.L. Katz launched a podcast titled How Not to Make a Movie, during which they uncovered all the chaos that occurred during the filming of Bordello of Blood. They shared unfiltered stories about interference from the studio, casting dilemmas, and disastrous production issues. The podcast serves as both a cautionary tale for filmmakers and a fascinating look into how what should have been a fun horror romp turned out as one of the most chaotic productions in the history of the Tales from the Crypt franchise. Personally, aside from Dennis Miller playing himself, again, I found the movie to be a fun little story. I think if Dennis Miller could have controlled his constant sarcastic improvisations, it would have been a decent movie at the very least. However, he is a primary contributor to the movie's poor reception, with his sarcastic jokes dominating the scenes and preventing a more coherent story from unfolding. I mentioned in the Demon Knight video that I truly can't stand Dennis Miller. I was dreading having to watch this movie due to him being the lead. When I was younger, if you'd asked me why I didn't like Dennis Miller, I would have just said he was annoying. Now, being older and having more experience, I can explain in more detail why I find him so insufferable. And I think the best way to explain it is through an example. As adults, we all have friend groups. And in every friend group, there's always one person. If you can't identify that person, it's probably you. It often starts the same way. You're all riding in a car together to go hang out somewhere, and one friend makes a genuinely funny joke. In fact, everyone in the car laughs loudly, but that's not sufficient for this guy. So he cracks another joke. It's funny, but the laughter in the car is noticeably subdued. Does he stop there? Nope. The night drags on, and the jokes keep coming, each one missing the mark. By the end of the night, you're just exhausted of hearing this friend's voice. Dennis Miller is that friend. He never knows when to stop, and his relentless babbling ruins the mood. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate the guy. I just find his style of humor irritating. But with that said, I give this movie a solid 6 out of 10. It's a great movie to have on the background while you and your buddies chat and have fun. The plot is easy to follow, and Angie Everhart is absolutely beautiful to watch as Lilith. She may not be as enthralling as Billy Zane, but her performance is the cherry on top that keeps you engaged from start to finish. But anyway, that's all I have for you in this one. Take care and have a great week. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.